Hello, class. Let's spend some time talking about the integument. The integument is made up of several different types of body membranes. Membranes are designed to cover body surfaces, line cavities, and to form protective membranes around your organs. They're classified according to their tissue type as well as their function. Epithelial membranes come in three different forms. You have cutaneous membranes, which are dry membranes. This is also known as the skin. And you have two different types of moist membranes. Apologies to people that hate that word. You have mucous membranes and serous membranes. Let's talk about mucous membranes first. These are membranes that line body cavities that open to the body's exterior somehow. So if you can imagine that any type of substance that could go into the body and could be in contact with any of these membranes or could exit the body and in doing so be in contact with any of these membranes, then that is something that's open in some way to the outside of the body, and that would be a mucous membrane. So, for example, you can swallow food, and that food can be in contact with the mucous membrane of your esophagus. You can have intercourse, and the penis can be in contact with the vaginal membrane. You could breathe air in, the air could be in contact with the mucous membrane in the lung. So, these are all membranes that line openings to the exterior of the body. They're not all shown here. The urethral membrane is not shown here. The end of the digestive tract at the rectum and the anus is not shown here, but I think you get the idea. Mucous membranes are always supported by a layer of connective tissue, and that tissue is known as the lamina propria. And this kind of gives you a cartoonized indication of where you would find the lamina propria. Remember that there is a layer of epithelium and then a basement membrane of a cellular tissue. And then you've got the lamina propria connective tissue deep to that. Just as an FYI, I like to point out some examples of pathophysiology when I can to try to demonstrate some of the concepts that we're going over. So there are several different diseases of mucous membranes. I mentioned two of them here. One of them is quite common, and that is aphthous ulcers. Aphthous ulcers are also known as canker sores. They usually have some sort of injurious origin, meaning the mucous membrane was damaged in some way. Perhaps it was scraped or bit, or maybe scratchy food rubbed on the surface and damaged it. A small little bacterial infection can sometimes exacerbate this, but it's not viral. It's not a viral agent that causes it. It's not um, contagious in any sense. It's basically just damage to that epithelial membrane, and it's possible that bacterial infections can make the aphthous ulcer worse, but it's not what's causing the aphthous ulcer to appear in the first place. A second condition of mucous membranes is an autoimmune disorder called lichen planus. It's named for the appearance of the whitish, grayish patches on the gums of the affected individual that look like a lichen that you might see outside. This occurs when the immune system thinks that various parts of the body are foreign or dangerous and it starts to attack them. And in this case, the immune system is attacking and damaging the mucous membrane of the gums and the gingiva. Now we're going to move on to serous membranes. Serous membranes line body cavities that are closed to the exterior of the body. And they are a double layered membrane. Within that double layer, you will find serous fluid. This fluid has a composition that's similar to the liquid portion of your blood or your cerebral spinal fluid. To imagine how these membranes are wrapped around your organ, imagine taking a balloon that's not completely inflated and pushing your fist down inside of it. The first part that your fist comes into contact with is the first layer of the serous membrane, and that is called the visceral membrane. Then you have that layer of serous fluid, and then the second layer of serous membrane that your fist would not be in contact with would be called the parietal membrane. So all serous membranes have two layers. The visceral layer is the layer that's closest to the organ that it's wrapping, and the parietal layer is the layer that is further from the organ that it's wrapping. So here we see an example of that, and this particular serous membrane is wrapped around the heart, and so it is referred to as the pericardium. So EM means that it's a confining membrane, card is referring to the heart, and peri means around. So this literally translates to a membrane that wraps around the heart. There are also diseases associated with serous membranes. So, inflammation of the peritoneum can result in peritonitis. The peritoneum is a serous membrane that you find in the abdominal cavity. So that's this like pink portion here. You also have serous membranes around the lungs, and these are known as pleura. So inflammation of the pleura can result in pleurisy. Inflammation of the pericardium around the heart can result in pericarditis. And so anytime you see itis on the ending of a word, this is referring to inflammation. So gingivitis is inflammation of the gingiva or the gums. So let's talk more specifically about the integumentary system. This is an organ system that doesn't exclusively include the skin. It also includes skin derivatives, such as glands, hair, and nails. Let's start with an overview of the skin and talk about the two layers that compose it. First, we have the epidermis. Epidermis is made out of stratified squamous epithelium. So we learned about that in the previous chapter on tissues. It is also referred to as that dry cutaneous membrane. Remember that all epithelium are avascular, meaning they don't have their own direct blood supply. The second layer of the skin is the dermis, which we can see here. And this is made out of dense, irregular connective tissue. Deep to the dermis, we have the hypodermis. The hypodermis is not technically part of the skin. It's just a layer that is deep to the skin. It's there to anchor the skin to other tissues or organs. And it's composed of a lot of adipose tissue, which is a type of loose, proper connective tissue. And you can also find areolar connective tissue, which is also a loose, proper connective tissue. Within the skin, we'll find a lot of specialized structures and a lot of specialized cells, which we will talk about as we go along. First, let's talk about the layers of the epidermis. The number of layers depends on what type of skin you are looking at. If you're talking about thin skin, then there are 4 layers in the epidermis. If you were talking about thick skin, which is only found on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet, thick skin has 5 layers. So we're going to examine thick skin here. The first layer is called the stratum corneum. It's composed mostly of dead cells, which are essentially just cellular carcasses. And the only thing that's left at this point is just a lot of this protein keratin. This protein is highly abundant in your skin and your skin derivatives, like your nails and your hair. And it provides a protective and even a waterproofing aspect to your integument. I remember corneum is the outer most superficial layer because you can develop corns, which are calluses that result from pressure on the outer surface of your feet. So I remember corn is referring to the corneum. The second layer is a very thin layer, and this is the layer that you only find in thick skin. This layer is completely absent in thin skin. It's the stratum lucidum. It's also composed of completely dead cells. Again, since it's found in thick skin only, you only have this layer on the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. The word root loose means light. And if you think about the word translucent, meaning something that allows light to pass through or across, we can remember that this layer is lucidum because the person that first described it said that in its unstained state, it appeared translucent. Our third layer is the stratum granulosum. Here, the cells of the epidermis are going through apoptosis. This is a controlled, programmed cell death where the organelles, apologies, I have a cat visiting because of course I do. I can't ever sit down and do any type of work, particularly recording a video, without a cat or 2 or 3 showing up. Okay, you got to get down, buddy. Okay, so, oh, and he's right back again. Oh dear. So the stratum granulosum, the cells are going through apoptosis, which is a way that cells can start to break down in a controlled way and recycle and reuse organelles and macromolecules found within the cell. Here, in the stratum granulosum, the cells are starting to convert pre-keratin, which is a precursor to the protein keratin, into the fully functional keratin. The granulosum is named granulosum because these cells appear grainy underneath the microscope because as they're going through apoptosis, the cells are taking those different parts and packaging them into vesicles for recycling, and that gives the cells a grainy appearance. Our fourth layer is the stratum spinosum, and it's named this way because the cells are spindle shaped, meaning they're kind of elongated and they can come to like little points on either end. The stratum spinosum is where the cells are making thick bundles of this pre-keratin. And like I said, that pre-keratin will later be converted into keratin once these cells move into this granulosum layer. Within the stratum spinosum, you can find specialized cells called Langerhans cells. I believe your book refers to them as dendritic cells. There are a lot of different immune cells, and the nomenclature can get a little bit confusing because a lot of the words we use to describe immune cells or white blood cells are words that are categories. So, for example, in lab, you may have learned about granulocytes and agranulocytes. A granulocyte is not a particular type of cell, rather, it's a category of cells. This category includes neutrophils, basophils, eosinophils, and even mast cells. Similarly, dendritic cells are a category of white blood cell. There's lots of different types of dendritic cells. There's plasmacytoid dendritic cells, myeloid dendritic cells, Langerhans dendritic cells. The ones that you find in the skin in particular are this Langerhans subtype. Dendritic cells were named because they have these little specialized processes that stick out in between different cells in the epithelium. The person that discovered the dendritic cell thought that these little processes looked like dendrites, which are little extensions that you see on neurons. And so because of that, he named this cell the dendritic cell. These little processes, although they're not exactly dendrites, they just look like them. Little processes are capable of wrapping around a foreign invader, like a pathogen, a bacteria, a fungal spore, a virus. And then they can use that little process to grab that foreign invader and bring it inside the cell using a process called phagocytosis. Then that immune cell will go through some other processes that will communicate to the immune system that there's an issue at hand that needs to be taken care of. So you can just think of these as immune cells, but when you see your book describing dendritic cells, they're referring to these. Okay. We also find keratinocytes within the stratum spinosum, and those are the cells in particular that are making our pre-keratin. Fun fact, keratinocytes are also the cells that get infected with HPV, the human papillomavirus, that can result in warts. Our fifth and final layer is the deepest layer of the epithelium, and it's called the stratum basale. Think of this as meaning on the bottom layer, just like the basement is the bottom floor of your house. This layer lies next to the dermis, and this is the only place in your epidermis where your epidermal cells are going through mitosis or cell division. As the cells go through mitosis, they get pushed up into these upper, more superficial layers, and they continue to keep pushing up and rising and going through all these changes and all these processes. So the full thickness of your epidermis represents epithelial cells that all started out in this deepest layer. And as they moved up, they're aging. So the layers represent epithelial cells at different parts of their life cycle. The dead outer layer will slough off, bathing or your clothes rubbing on it or scratching, and it will get replaced by cells in the layer beneath it. And this continually happens. The life cycle of your epidermis is about 4 weeks. You'll also notice that there are a couple specialized cells in the stratum basale, including melanocytes. Melanocytes are specialized cells that produce pigment that contributes to our skin tone. And we also have Merkel cells, which are a type of light touch receptor. So when the skin is touched lightly, the Merkel cells detect that and will send electrical information to nerves, which will take that information to the brain, and the brain will process this as a light touch. So our melanocytes are our pigment-producing cells that produce melanin. There are different types of melanin that can be produced, and the different types result in different color variations. Some of the pigments are more yellowish, some are more brownish, some are darker and almost black. The types of pigments and the amount of pigments that you have from your melanocytes is based in part on your genetic background. Further, it's also influenced by the environment. Melanocytes become activated when UV light interacts with them, and the UV light is a trigger for them to start producing melanin because the melanin acts as a pigment that can protect the skin from UV damage. So the more you're out in the sun, the more melanin your melanocytes are producing, and the darker your tan will get. There are disorders of melanocytes. There are specific cancers that can affect only melanocytes. There's also an autoimmune disorder that can affect melanocytes. Again, autoimmune disorders occur when there's a part of your body that becomes mistaken for a pathogen, and your immune system thinks that particular part of your body is foreign and starts attacking it. In the case of albinism, the immune system becomes confused about the presence of melanocytes and thinks that the melanocytes are foreign, even though they're not. The immune system will start attacking these cells and killing them. And it results in the epithelium in that area having little to no melanin. Autoimmune disorders are chronic and progressive, so they get worse over time. And you can see that albinism in this young woman has progressed as she's aged. These are all photos of the same individual. These are her school photos. And you can see how the albinism progressed to more areas of her skin as she got older. Michael Jackson also suffered from albinism, and he did not like how I'm sorry, I misspoke. Um, what I was referring to earlier with the autoimmune disorders that attack the melanocytes, I was referring to vitiligo, not albinism. So these are pictures of a woman that has vitiligo, and Michael Jackson also had vitiligo. And so the reason Michael Jackson was so much lighter in his older years is he used a skin bleaching chemical called monobenzone, which you can get by prescription, to bleach out the other areas of his skin that were still pigmented because he didn't like the appearance of the splotchiness from the vitiligo. All right, now on to albinism. Apologies for misspeaking there. Albinism is a genetic condition that occurs when there is a mutation in the melanocytes that result in them not producing melanin. It is not an autoimmune disorder, it's an inherited genetic condition. Albinism can vary quite a bit in terms of its phenotype or severity. Some people produce absolutely no melanin. Some people produce varying amounts of melanin. Some people lack melanin in certain parts of their body, like their skin, but they will make some melanin in other parts of their body, like maybe their hair or their eyes. You can see how much melanin contributes to a person's skin tone. This picture up here of this woman, she is an African American woman. And all of her family members are dark skinned except for her because she is not able to produce this pigment. Another disorder of melanocytes that's quite common is called melasma. And this is kind of the opposite of what we saw on the previous slide. In melasma, the melanocytes become overactive and produce too much pigment. This commonly occurs during pregnancy, where women will accumulate too much pigment in different areas on their face. And melasma has some very distinctive patterns that it typically follows. People will typically get hyperpigmentation above the upper lip, patches that accumulate on the cheeks, and patches that accumulate above the eyebrows or on the forehead. After the baby is delivered, the melasma usually resolves on itself. Because this is so common during pregnancy, melasma is often referred to as the mask of pregnancy, although there are other reasons that people can develop it, and those reasons really aren't well known or understood. But it's thought that it's related to the immune system, as a lot of people that have autoimmune disorders also have melasma. I, in fact, have it, and I have never been pregnant. And my melasma is probably related to my autoimmune disorder. You probably won't ever notice it on my face because I'm very, very careful to wear sunblock every day. And if it's bright and sunny outside, you'll see me walking around campus with a hat. But if I do forget to put sunblock on and I get a lot of UV exposure, the melasma will look very much like this pattern where I'll get a dark upper lip, I'll get some splotchiness on the apples of my cheeks, and I get a patch above one of my eyebrows. Now, melanin isn't the only thing that determines what your skin color looks like. There are other pigments that can accumulate in the skin, like carotene. Carotene is an orange to yellow pigment that's found in certain vegetables like carrots or red peppers or squash. And you often will see children, particularly light skinned children, that in their infancy might have a discolored or an orange colored nose. And this is because when a baby is weaning from milk and starting to eat solid foods, you don't want to give them multiple solid foods at the same time because if they were to have an allergic reaction, you wouldn't know which food had triggered it. So it's convention that when you introduce a new food to your infant, that you give them that food for a period of time, like about a week. So if a young baby is eating carrots for a week, and then maybe the next week they're eating red peppers, and then maybe the next week they're eating yellow peppers, you could see how that could result in them consuming a lot of this pigment, and the pigment can deposit in the skin and cause temporary discoloration. We also get some of our skin tone from the red coloring in our blood capillaries due to a pigment called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is that protein that carries blood gases around, but it's also a pigment. Let's learn about some of the specialized structures that we find in the dermis. The dermis has two different layers. There's this upper layer called the papillary layer, and it's named that because of the presence of these invaginations called dermal papilla. A papilla is a bump, just like you've got papilla on your tongue. Colloquially, we refer to these as taste buds, but you'll learn when we get to the special senses chapter, this is actually a bit inaccurate. Taste buds are a specialized sense receptor that reside inside the papilla. The bumps themselves are actually papilla and not taste buds then. Now, back to the dermal papilla in your dermis. These little invaginations house specialized structures like capillary loops, which provide blood supply to the deepest part of your epidermis. The blood supply allows nutrients and gases to nourish the dividing cells in the stratum basale by passing into the epidermis through diffusion. You can also find nerve endings, which are pain receptors, and additional light touch receptors, which are called Meissner's corpuscles. So Merkel cells are touch receptors that you find in the stratum basale of the epithelium, and Meissner's corpuscles are light touch receptors that you find in the papillary layer of the dermis. The second layer of the dermis is the reticular layer. And in the reticular layer, you find many different structures: larger vessels, flattened oil glands, and deep pressure receptors that are called lamellar corpuscles, and they're also known as Pacinian corpuscles. They're described as lamellar corpuscles because they have this shape where there are a lot of concentric rings in them, and concentric rings are known as lamella. We'll see this term again when we get to the skeletal system. The lamellar corpuscle reacts to deep pressure or vibrations because when the dermis is compressed or vibrated, the compression will deform the shape of these rings, and that will cause electrical changes in this receptor, which will get passed on to nerves and passed on to the brain for processing. I think I will stop there and make a separate recording for the latter part of the chapter so that if you want to listen to the other part another time, you can take a little break in between.